Welcome to today's webinar, which is an FD's role in growing businesses organically. My name is Phil Scott, Director at FD Recruit, and I'm joined by 4 expert panelists who are sharing their knowledge of growing businesses. One of our panelists got some technical issues, so hopefully Phil will be with us shortly, but I'll just run through the running order. We're going to run through a main set of questions, which will take the first part of the discussion. If any of the listeners would like to pop in any questions, if you can use the chat box facility, which is located at the bottom of your screens. Contrary to what Zoom says about emailing them through, we haven't got the email inbox open. We're just locked into Zoom, so use the chat box facility at the bottom. So just introducing our panelists. We'll start with Colin Taverner. I'm going to throw it over to you, Colin. If you'd just like to give the listeners a quick overview of your background and a little bit about your growth experience, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I started my career with PricewaterhouseCoopers in consumer markets audit and then corporate finance advisory before heading out into the world of industry. And I've worked in a number of high growth businesses ranging from 2 million turnover up to 150 million turnover. Businesses like Mamas and Papas, Pharmacy to You, Vet Partners, and now I'm at My Expert Midwife, which is a small, relatively young business in the specialist pregnancy and birth skincare market. So we're growing fast organically, so hopefully I can give some good insight into that.
Thanks, Colin. And we'll go over to Mark Stone. Do you want to give us a quick overview of your background, please, Mark?
Yeah, sure. So Mark Stone here, most recently CFO of Energy Systems Catapult. We were one of those catapult businesses set up to stimulate innovation and growth within problem areas within the UK, where there's previously a lack of investments in innovation in those areas. This was energy systems specifically, so supporting innovators and SMEs. And by trade, I'm a turnaround specialist for the last 20 odd years. And as obviously as part of that fast-paced change and growth, but all of them organically, I hasten to add. So hopefully I've got a bit to add during this session.
Thank you. And James, we'll go over to you if you give the listeners a quick overview of your background and who you are.
Good afternoon. So I'm James Owen. I'm the CFO of a global premium beauty brand called Pixie. I'm also a non-executive director of SEMA. Spent most of my career in growth businesses, from one as small as 10 million, one more about 250 million, and range from anywhere within 4 years from a 2x on that revenue to about 10x. So been through some of that was inorganic, but most of that was organic. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. Thanks,
James. Phil, have we got you?
You have, yes.
Brilliant. Do you want to give the listeners a quick overview of your background? Phil just had a internet outage just as we were starting, so well done for getting that back on.
Hi all, it's Phil Dearden. Background is primarily in smaller private equity driven businesses. Had a stint in some major corporates over the years, all really supporting growth orientated businesses. Left sort of corporate land back in early 2000s, and since then I've been running 2 managed pub businesses, VC backed, managed to build and exit both, and in between that I've been looking at portfolio FD roles primarily in private equity businesses.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. So we're going to start at the beginning. I'm going to go over to James. What, for the purpose of the discussion today, what do we mean by organic growth?
Traditionally, I've always seen organic growth as primarily referring to the top line. You know, it's how do we increase that number over time? And organic for me would always mean there are not acquisitions involved. So it's using the core, investment and infrastructure in the business you've already got. However, it can come in various different forms, and I'm sure the rest of the team will, the guys will expand on it. But whether or not that's commercial innovation, product innovation, increased distribution or sales, or just getting more bang for your buck. There's a whole host of sins that can come within organic growth, but it's all about pushing one of those that little bit further, and it's not about buying new assets.
Brilliant. Mark, what's your thoughts on the definition?
I think James has covered it perfectly, but just to add to that is, how do you use that fuel within the business? How do you use that systemic thinking of how that ecosystem works together to absolutely maximize isn't always the right thing to do, but optimize that top line. So as you go through, working with businesses this year, they're going through organic growth, but you can imagine COVID being one of those. It's kind of one of those issues where you've got some businesses that have had massive disruption in terms of growth, and then but that's not sustainable. So what's the impact on that in the long term? So there's many cycles and many shapes to organic growth, and hopefully we can cover that in this session.
Okay, and Phil, what are the sort of different routes that you can take to achieve organic growth?
Well, guys touched on that there. I mean, my sort of experience is very much around sort of product development and more sort of the supply chain development and growth of the number of existing sites that you have. If we go back to sort of manufacturing and so forth, then product development, sales development through increased products is my sort of preferred route in terms of my experience. But supply chain is, when you look at sort of internet delivery these days, supply chain is a huge way of growing the business.
Colin, what's your thoughts on the different types of routes for organic growth?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Phil said. I think for me, the two key areas, and certainly what I've seen in the businesses I've worked in, is the boring bit of trying to deliver more volume to your existing customer base. So that's organic growth just as much as bringing out new products. But then equally, that expansion of your customer base, whether it be in your existing market, or even thinking about new geographies, but also perhaps opening up your new uses for existing products. So all of those things are, as James said at the very beginning, just essentially making the existing core deliver more to a broader range of customers wherever they might be located.
Mark, thoughts on that?
Yeah, can I just chip in there just to build on what the guys have said? It's then kind of looking at different channels and routes for that. So if you got franchise models that you can, it doesn't have to just be through your own. If you look more towards R&D and in business I've worked with in the last 4 years, the different licensing and IP type of models to get yourself to market. So there's certainly different routes to apply to that. And if you look at, again, let's draw it back to COVID. You've got two sides of it. You've got your asset utilization and thinking, okay, I'm a hotel chain now, and that COVID's hit, I'm struggling. How do I then reutilize that asset to grow the business out? And as we get to, I hate the term, but new norms, does the usage of our asset base change? So the different routes now. If you think about pubs, and they're now thinking about pub desks during the week, and cafes are thinking about, and coffee shops are thinking about that. And then if you think about kind of the demand led and the customer pull through for growth as well. Again, during COVID, we've had businesses that have benefited from, let's say hand sanitization products, but then it's impacted on their, other products mix and portfolio as well. But it's not forever. So it's kind of understanding those routes and the interconnectivity of those routes, kind of going forward through different business cycles.
And how does the FD assess these routes then, Mark?
So it's not just about the top line, growth. We mentioned it at the top. It is about top line, but the FDs assesses it by, are we fit for growth? So it's kind of looking at that holistic piece across the supply chain, looking at the interconnectivity of your resources. And I often go into businesses and do the simple McKinsey 7S, and your systems, or your strategy, is your supply chain, is everything geared up for growth? And I think we come on to this question later about growing pains, and as you go, especially if you go through stellar growth, but even through this kind of step change and incremental growth, you'll get some parts of the business that suffer as part of this, either through experience, or you've not got enough staff, or you've not got the right assets in place, whatever it is. The FD can be there to kind of rise above it, do that sense check and kind of, monitor and measure. Are we there? Is everything in place? Not just about the top line, but all of the resources to support that growth.
Thanks, Mark. And James, anything to add on that?
Well, I think just to Mark's point, there are a plethora of options available to you, and part of the FD's role really is to try and check all those plates, see which ones are spinning, and place the right bet on the right horse. It's have you got all the capital required to invest for growth? Is there an opportunity cost? What's the probability of success? Even as simple as, can we execute this with excellence? Do we have the right strategy, the right negotiation capability? So it's helping partner the business and making it happen and making the right decision, because it's impossible to do all of these great ideas that are in front of you.
Yeah, could I just add back onto build on James's again, a real life example. So a business a few years ago, I won't say when, but going through fantastic growth. And then they called me up and said, yeah, we're going through fantastic growth, but we're losing a packet. Yeah, so they were losing money on it. So, they've not done that joined up thinking in terms of, we're growing, but what's the impact all the way through to the bottom line and how this all works together. So there can be bad growth.
Thanks, Mark. And Colin, over to you. I mean, we sort of talk about the we, in the business when we're planning for growth. But what is the FD's role in particular in that planning, in the growth plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think James used a really interesting word when he was answering the previous question, partner. And I think that's a key thing for me, is that, as the FD, you've got to be an integral part of that team for planning the growth, because, you're one of the few people in the business that kind of sees the whole. Many people have got their own view and their own areas that they're looking after, and they've got obviously ambitions for the business as a whole, but through their own lens. And I think as an FD, a big part of your role is that independent sense check of the plans and the thinking, but also supporting and working alongside your peers within the management team to make sure that those plans are properly joined together and are properly thought through, are properly costed, that you've got a good quality forecast model that you can use for facilitating the planning, and as James said, the key one being also funding, because it's great to have these plans, but you've got to make sure that you can deliver them, and a big part of that is funding. And again, we've mentioned already that there's often many ideas of ways in which the business can grow and opportunities that the business can chase down, and you've got to help the kind of your colleagues within the management team to make sure that they spend their time and effort and the money and the resources of the business wisely. So it's about making sure that you properly prioritize, and that is an objective process, not just based on people's hunches. So I mean, I've worked in quite a lot of owner managed businesses, and one of the big challenges in FD is not being the party pooper, and trying to achieve a degree of realism whilst also ambition, and that's a really challenging and delicate balancing act you've got to achieve, because you are the anchor, but at the same time you've got to help the ship, to use the analogy, move forward as quickly as the ambitions want them to.
Thanks, Colin. And Phil, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I certainly add to that, and definitely what James said a bit in terms of partnership, and Colin went on really to explore that. And we all cut our teeth, and you only have to go into a board meeting when the business isn't doing too well to know that the expectation on the FD is very high, to understand that and to help the business out of it. So if you turn that back and say, right, how should that work to begin with, so you don't go into that position in the first place? It's working very closely with the team, taking that independent view, being prepared to challenge and so forth, all the way through to actually understand what's happening. Everybody's bought into it. It's a partnership approach, as James said, and you measure and monitor and go along as a team. You're all in it together, and it is very much a joint effort to manage a process which can be very complex.
Thanks, Phil. And James, we sort of touched upon the sort of considerations and the challenges. What are the main considerations and challenges that you've got to think about?
One of the things that always scares me a little bit is short-termism. You often see it in the sports world, like with football managers and such like. But for me, there's a real there needs to be a focus between the measures and KPIs on how a management team are appraised and what their objectives are, and an alignment with the stakeholders. Something that there's the old phrase, what gets measured gets delivered. And I frequently see that organic growth rarely comes easily and it rarely comes cheaply. And it's also, it can sometimes be a bit of a vanity measure when the shareholders mainly want bottom line growth, not top line growth. And the management team are often rewarded on top line growth. So it's just making sure the unintended consequences are thought through. And it's to Mark's point earlier, not all growth is good growth. So it needs to be well thought through. Thanks,
James. And Mark, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just had a couple of things. Yeah, absolutely. I had a couple of things. One thing to be wary of is that bullish finger in the air. So it's, the FD is there to be the guardian of the business, not the pessimist. It's the realist. You're there, you're the responsible director there, kind of, on behalf of the shareholders, the stakeholders. So, it's managing that expectation where it's too bullish. Go through the scenario planning, play it back to the rest of the management team. So, you think this is what you're going to achieve, but are we set up for this? Is it realistic? What if we don't? And kind of playing back to everybody. If this doesn't occur, then what? I mentioned it earlier, but one of the biggest challenges that I see in growing businesses are those growing pains.
And Phil, what would you say the sort of main cost considerations are, and how do you make sure you don't overspend?
It depends on what type of growth and the impact. But if you're sort of expanding a product range or a supply chain distribution network, then you've obviously got a lot of costs involved in terms of people, process costs, and technology costs, and you've got to plan those accordingly in line with the growth plan. But it can be, it's very rarely just one or two costs. It has the cost of the increase itself. There's increased costs that go back into the business to actually manage more transactions and so forth, or there's more storage needed. So there's a whole plethora of costs that go in to manage. And we'll touch a question later on, what happens to those costs if the growth isn't profitable or doesn't come.
Thanks, Phil. And Colin, what's your thoughts on controlling those costs?
Yeah, I think you've got to have a clear plan. So yeah, we talked earlier about prioritizing against the many opportunities. So you've got to have a clear plan. You've got to have a forecast against that plan. And the key thing for me is always that you've got to set an expectation, and then you've got to measure yourself against expectation, because there is a danger that if you don't do that, you can just go off and things run away before you realize, before you have the chance to bring, keep them under control or bring them back under control. And I think the sort of the very traditional, conventional stage gate process is an important part of that, because you've got to have milestones that you can benchmark your performance against, so that you know whether you're on track or not, and you can act before things start to get away from you or get out of control. And I think as well, one of the key things I've learned over the years, and it's a difficult one to kind of nail every time, but it's that decision point around when you scale up your resources, because it's a double-edged sword, because if you don't do it soon enough, then your resources get overstretched and things can go wrong in that way. But then if you do go too quickly and you put too much cost into the business, and then that growth doesn't quite come through as you perhaps anticipated, then you put yourself in a difficult position, because you perhaps don't have the revenue to cover that cost. So that's a really kind of delicate balancing act that needs some careful thought as you grow, and you've got to make sure you've got the expertise to deliver that growth, because you don't always, particularly in smaller businesses, you don't always have all of the skills needed to unlock those new opportunities, and external help is really valuable then.
Thanks, Colin. And Mark, so what happens in that situation that Colin has just outlined, where you've increased the cost base and the infrastructure, but the sales haven't followed? What happens there?
You look for another job. No, seriously though, the point to this, if you've got there and it's such a shock, then you've done something wrong in the planning in advance. So the growth might not come. It's never going to be smack bang on where you think it's going to be, but well in advance you'd have done your scenario planning. You'd have tested fit for growth. Is everything aligned? You're not going to sell something that the customers don't want, presumably. But then if you do get to a point where it's not quite where you want it to be, it's making sure that, have you tested that you've got the levers to readjust? So it's either top line levers, so with the assets that we've got, can we redeploy, do something with it, look for different types of sales, or then with your cost base as well, what levers can you pull quickly to, do you divest to refund that growth, because it might be that things can happen, COVID can happen, other extenuating circumstances can happen. So it's making sure you've got levers, and more so enough planning up front and sensitivity around were you fit for growth in the first place. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses kind of do go into it blind, and that's where they can struggle, or a bit head in the sand, or just focus on the top line. As the FD, don't do that. Be the guardian. I think Colins said it, of the whole. You're holding the whole. That's your responsibility.
Thanks, Mark. And James, anything to chip in on that one?
I think, just building on what Mark said, I think just have a calm head. Plans can be fluid as well. That's I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So sometimes there's validity in just going back to the plan and assessing if it was ever realistic in the first place, and do we need to adjust it because we still have faith that this is the right thing to do, or have we just executed poorly and we can course correct? So both execution and planning can still be relatively fluid.
Thank you. And over to you, Colin. What we talk about this sort of growth, but obviously this growth needs funding. What are the sort of ways that you can fund this growth? What's out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a myriad of sources of funding and options, and I think that's probably in the current climate, in some respects, got harder in some areas, but then actually in other areas there's a lot more out there than there perhaps would be in more conventional times. But clearly there's a whole raft of debt type products that are out there. In my experience, one of the challenges you have with those normally is that people need to see some opportunity for the debt service in the future, so perhaps doesn't lend itself to businesses that have not yet got beyond break even and making reliable profits. But of course then there are equity type solutions out there where you can look at there are institutions that will lend into high growth businesses, into young businesses, into more mature businesses, and they're also through some organizations you can tap into high net worth individuals who perhaps will take a different view of risk to a more conventional institution. So I think the key thing for me is always there are plenty of advisors out there who can help put you in touch with the right people for the circumstances of your business, and I would always even if you've got a lot of knowledge in that area, I think it's always good to tap into the expertise of advisors, because they are they're in the marketplace all the time, and it's very easy to become a little bit rusty, a little bit out of date in terms of those things. So having somebody good alongside you to hold your hand and guide you is important. But what I would also say is never overlook the opportunity for your supply chain to be part of this. And Phil mentioned supply chain earlier, and I've been in situations before where you're perhaps working with new customers who want to grow their business as well as you grow yours, and equally your suppliers want to grow their business just as you want to grow yours. And sometimes you can achieve some improvement in your working capital position, which unlocks cash just by talking to your suppliers, talking to your customers, and coming up with an arrangement that helps you to manage that working capital cycle without needing external funding as such, if you work together to achieve that growth. Thanks,
Colin. And Phil, I mean, you've worked in a sort of widespread of businesses, and you've done some PE and that. What sort of funding would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, there's some key questions that you need to ask yourself, and depending on where you are in your life cycle of your business. If you're fairly new and young and so forth, and you need funding, there's a wide variety of sources around, but again, some of those are limited because of the youthfulness of your business, and you've got to make decisions on equity. You give some equity away, do you want to retain it all? And that drives some of the sources that you want to go to. So if you're 2 or 3 years into your business and you want to grow and you think about private equity route, then you've got to be willing to give some equity away. If you don't want to do that, you're going down the bank route, you're going down other routes that don't involve ownership of the business sort of drastically changing. So depending on where you are, but also depending on, and you'll take advice from the people that you trust as to, how good is your business to invest in? Because that can then drive as to where you go as well. And so a key question you need to ask yourself around ownership and longevity and so forth.
Thanks, Phil. And James, question to you: what sort of risks would you say are associated with not just growing, but actually growing too quickly?
One of the big ones I'd say is operational and cultural, actually. A lot of high growth businesses, Colin specifically mentioned it earlier on, often there's an owner founder dynamic to it. And what you find in those is very often the owner founder who's done an amazing job to create this thing in the first place is integral to every single process, whether it's payment runs, whether it's recruitment, whatever it may be. The buck starts with them. They become a massive bottleneck. The bigger the business, the more complex it becomes, the slower it becomes when it should still be agile versus the big boys. So ultimately, operational process becomes critical, and that's a big challenge. And also cultural dilution. You've gone from often a charismatic individual who touches everyone, hires everyone, to passing that down to lieutenants who hire, and they might have, over time, that the bigger the pyramid becomes, the less, unless you've got a really clear articulation of your values and your culture, you're more likely to become a slightly different company over time and lose some of the secret sauce that you had in the first place.
Thanks, James. And Mark, what's your thoughts on growing too quickly?
Yeah, just to add to James, it can massively, distort that infrastructure. The people within there might not have had the capability and the experience in that growth transition. And sometimes you need to go outside to kind of bring that in to handhold coach, help you restructure, build yourself a more agile structure, because you might have, you might be once upon a time quite small and it's a flat structure and everybody reports into you. But as everything, as things grow, then you're spending too much time acting down and not, spending time on the right things. So there's that kind of assessment. And just the, that whole, your processes, your systems, your strategy. It can be, you can grow too quickly in one area, be opportunistic, and it distracts from kind of your core growth as well. And that kind of pulls and distorts the fabric of the business. And I think, James was talking about it earlier as well, the communication and the culture then gets distorted, and then the belief, and you were what you set out to be. So just building on James's points there.
Thanks, Mark. And Phil, how do you manage these risks? What things can you put in place to manage these risks?
This is where it's very important for the FD to possibly take this as one of his key aims in, understanding the risks, working with the team very closely to understand what can go wrong, and actually documenting those, assessing those, and managing against those as part of a project plan as you progress the growth strategy. You've got to be able to understand right at the outset as to what the primary risks are. So you really got to understand that as a team and drive it from all the constituents of the board or the wider team or subject matter experts that are in the business. So that primary need to understand. You have to, and then you've got to be able to flex. You've got to be able to understand as you go along, new risks might come along and you need to understand those. And then you've got to do the impact analysis of the key risks. And it just manages to go along.
Thanks, Phil. And Colin, what's your thoughts on managing growing risks?
Yeah, so I think to add to what Phil said, I think it comes back to, we've said a couple of times before, having a clear plan and making sure that you do go back to that plan and you keep a track of where you are against your plan, because it's really easy to get a little bit lost in the kind of the hustle and bustle of achieving this growth and driving for this growth, and sometimes it's quite easy just to lose sight of what you were actually trying to achieve, and before you realize it, you've gone off at a tangent and you're not where you thought you were going to be. And I think the other thing for me is that people are a massive part of every business, and I think it's important that in any high growth business, there's a massive energy and there's a massive positivity about the journey you're on, and hopefully it's going in the direction that you wanted it to. But that does also put stresses and strains on different parts of the business at different times, and also there's a little bit of I think you find that they don't want to be the person who puts the brakes on or perhaps hinders that growth profile. James talked about the owner manager potentially being a bottleneck. Well, that can happen anywhere within the business, and if someone feels that they're perhaps getting overwhelmed or getting not keeping up with the rest of the business around them, then that can be very stressful for that person, and there's a great temptation just to try and kind of put the head down and ignore that. So I think making sure that your people are okay and that you've got your resources in the right place is a really important way to manage the risk, because again, if you keep an eye on it as it's going along, like as Phil said, in terms of your thinking about your impact analysis and those sorts of things, if you're doing that on an ongoing basis as you go along, then hopefully you can avoid some of these risks becoming problems. But the speed of growth can put a lot of pressure on a business, and the senior management can very quickly become time poor, because particularly in smaller businesses, because there's just so much stuff to do on top of the day job. There's this new stuff coming through the door all the time.
Thanks, Colin. Mark?
Yeah, I just want to build on it. I think Colin said it in there, but it's, I can't emphasize enough to act at the right time on the risks and don't bury your head in the sand. Too often I say, bury your head in the sand, it'll go away, these small risks, and it just blows up and it's too late. And then the recovery to actually, get yourself back on track takes an inordinate amount of effort. And it's not always about acting early, it's about acting at the right time. But you see a lot of procrastination and head in the sand stuff. Don't do that. Act on it and manage those risks actively and effectively.
Yeah, Phil, sorry, can I just add one more thing which does link to that, which is the other thing. And different FDs are different. We all work in different ways. We've all got our idiosyncrasies. But I think one thing to be really mindful of is that, and a business owner once said this to me. So, the answer's not in your spreadsheet. So I think it's important to not get too focused on that forecast, that model, that plan, that reporting that you find quite comforting, quite easy. And it is that thing about, I said before about the people side of things, make sure you're out there spending time with the people, because it's the people that will make the difference and deliver the plan or not deliver the plan. So, that's really important, because it's really easy just to retrench into something that you're familiar and comfortable with. But actually, it's the people side of things, which doesn't always come easy to some of us. But it's important that you have that relationship across the business, not just with your management peers, but with the next tier down of people within that business. Thanks,
Colin. And Mark, I mean, the title of this this session is an FD's role in growing businesses. Why do you actually need an FD? I mean, why not an FC? What can an FD do that an FC can't? Obviously, ignoring micro businesses that maybe couldn't afford an FD. But over to you. Why an FD and not an FC?
Yeah, I mean, FDs and FCs can do, FCs can do these things as well. But it's kind of, what's the activity? What's the benefit? What's the type of thinking that you need? So as an FD, you're there as the guardian of the business. So you're starting off with, board strategy, if you like. And so you're looking at the growth credibility. You're looking at the whole of the business. You're looking at all of the levers. You're doing that strategic thinking forward and how all of these things interact, and whether your growth will occur in a credible manner. So, you kind of rise above, you'll have the numbers from the FC, but it's then rising above it. And I think, as Colin said, you've got to understand the business. Is your commercial strategy spot on, and is that going to work? Have you got the supply chain to support that? So it's these kind of cross the table conversations and the interaction of the strategies, be it financial, funding, operational strategy, supply chain strategy. It's the interconnectivity of these things that, whether it's the FD or the FC, that kind of thing can bring to the table. Thanks,
Mark. And James, what's your thoughts on that? Why, what can an FD do that an FC can't?
I'm in the same place. They're two in the same individuals. Often an FD has been an FC, but it's the framing of it. It's the lens through which you see the world. An FD needs to be a bit more external focused rather than internal. It's a bit more head up rather than head down. It's about thinking about what could the numbers be rather than are the numbers right.
Yeah,
it's a whole sequence of mindset changes that need to, certainly if you've migrated from one role to the other.
Thanks, James. We've got 2 or 3 questions to go, and then we're going to open it out to questions from the audience. Just as a reminder for anyone that would like to put a question to the panelists, if you can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll start to collate the questions in there. So we'll keep an eye out on the chat box, but pop any questions you've got in there. So over to you, Colin. Got a question for you. What advice would you give to a business owner who is considering organic growth?
Okay, I think obviously there's a lot of things you could say, but I think for me the 3 are, first of all, make sure you've got a good FD, but also I guess before you start on that plan, before you start on that journey, make sure that you have got the right expertise and skills within your business, or you can at least access them through external people who can work with you, and also make sure that you've got the funding in place to grow, because if you don't have those 2 things, you'll very quickly come unstuck.
Thanks, Colin. And Phil, what advice would you give to a business owner looking at growing?
Yeah, just building on what Colin said, you've got to have the right resources in, the right skill sets to be able to do it. But you go back to planning again. You really need to know where you are, and that includes your resources and your business position and where you fit in the market, because that's going to be your base point you're moving from. And stress the requirement to actually plan it properly. Assess your risks and so forth, and actually treat it as a well-defined project that you need to manage as such and resource as such, and rather than being just add it into the normal business, the existing workforce are going to manage it. You've got to look at how the impact on the business it's going to make, and flex the business accordingly to be able to control it, manage it, and deliver it.
Thanks, Phil. And James, so that's advice on for a business owner, but what about the FD? What advice would you have for an FD who's about to embark on a high growth plan?
I'd say be careful of the business owners. Business owners are great orators and salesmen, but your role is to challenge them and to help them. And I think the summary of everything we've said so far is kind of help them navigate toward the best, but plan for the worst. Have backups, have fail-safes, have checks and balances. Make sure it's an informed decision. Ensure that they're culturally ready for the challenges that growth brings with it. And just be there and support them through it, and just be at the heart of everything that's going on in the business.
Thanks, James. Mark, what advice would you give an FD?
I'd agree with James there, and just be wary of the bullish forecasting, and because there'll be a CEO or an owner will be so engrossed in their product and fully believe in it. So it's bringing that that realism there. And again, what I see as issues in some businesses or some FDs is they start to lead it by cost. Growth is not cost led, it's quality led. It's what the customers are, but it's what's the right level of investment and what's the right level of cost to achieve it as well. So underinvestment can be as bad sometimes as overspends in some areas, because you're not leveraging, not stimulating the activity enough to grow the top line. I think just be wary and support support the owner in looking at the whole.
Thanks, Mark. Last question before we go over to the audience questions, and we'll go to Phil with this one. What mistakes have you made, and what advice would you have to other FDs so they don't make the same mistakes?
I mean, a lot goes on what we said already. You've got to get involved, and I suppose my first foray into private equity was I joined a management buyout. Just after the buyout, it was a very quick buyout, all happened in a month, and the management team just won a big contract to supply an existing product with greater volumes into Sainsbury's, and I was new into the business, and I really should have assessed it in a lot more detail. I had a group FD that was controlling it, but I really should have been a lot more bullish in actually looking for the detail behind it. And we ended up with a lot more product than we needed. We ended up with a excessive working capital requirements and so forth, and not a good start to the buyout. So that was a big learning curve, cutting your teeth straight in. And I've seen some major problems, major sort of issues with growth. I won't name the food retailer, but it sort of sold the crown jewels of all its freeholds that it had on the store that it had built up over many years. Decided a strategy to turn it into a more upmarket retail and spent sort of $500 million of the crown jewels, and it didn't work. And so you can go from small to large, and it still happens. It all comes down to, what we've been talking about all the way through. Assess it properly. Will it work? And put the controls in.
Thanks, Phil. And Colin, same question to you. Any mistakes you've made or near mistakes that you could give advice to other FDs so they don't make the same mistakes?
Yeah, I think the one that it's really difficult to resist the temptation is that you're part of a team and a team that's trying to deliver growth. And we've said before that the FD needs to be that kind of voice of realism and that independent sense check. But it's really, really hard when you're part of a team and you want to be in that team, and you don't want to be the person who is the party pooper, like I said before. And I think we all will have been there where we've sat together with our teams, we've pulled together some forecasts, we've done the sensitivity analysis, we've done the check-in and all that sort of thing, and you still end up with a plan that you felt was kind of ambitiously realistic, but at the end of the day the business doesn't quite live up to that. And I think that's just it's a really difficult and challenging balancing act to achieve. And I would always advocate just go back and just run that what if one more time, perhaps in a quiet room without everybody else around you, and be prepared to go back to the team and say, actually guys, I've had a look at this with a clear head, and actually I think we need to have another look at it, because I think people in the long run will respect you much more for that than if you just become a yes man within the team. And I think for me, early in my career, I was told by a senior executive in a business I work for that the most important plan is plan B. And I think that's a really key thing as an FD, is make sure I think Mark and James have said this already, but make sure you know where you're going, not as in leaving the business, but as in how you're going to sort out the problem if you do run short of your plan, and perhaps your funding is in difficulty. And the other one is just build and use your personal network, because in a high growth business you're always going to come across stuff that you've never seen, done or heard of before. But if you've got a decent network, things like LinkedIn help you to keep that network, together. You can be pretty sure that there's going to be somebody out there that or you've met or you've come across that's perhaps experienced that situation before. And I would say don't be afraid to pick up the phone or drop an email through to someone who you think maybe has experienced that before, and they can help you, because it can be quite lonely. If you've got some people out there that can just give you a little tip or a hint or point you in the right direction, then it suddenly becomes a lot more manageable.
Thanks, Colin.
So can I do one quick build?
Yeah.
Just to share a mistake of mine. Growth is a valuable thing, and if you can always try and make sure you have a piece of it, One of my earlier growth journeys was a 9x on revenue over a 4-year time frame, and I didn't get any of it. I didn't have shares, I didn't have an LTIP, I didn't have anything like that. It's a really key thing, guys, because a lot of what we talked about is how to ensure the wheels don't fall off the bus. But there's a positive side of this, of course. If we've done our job brilliantly, you do get growth. So make sure you get more than just your salary there. You know, get some sort of growth linked LTIP if equity is not on the table.
Okay. Thanks, guys. So we're going to move on to the audience questions. I'm going to just throw it out at random to the panelists. So if you've got an answer, stick your hand up, and then we know who to switch over to. So the first one we've got in. What are your thoughts on fast fail, and do you believe there is a place for it when pursuing organic growth? Who wants that one? Mark?
You know, whether it's growth, turnaround, whatever it is, fail, you know, especially in innovation, fast fail is just part of what you need to do. It absolutely is essential, because, you know, you need to, if you do fail fast, then it's how quickly can you recover and move on, explore new avenues. So I think it's absolutely fundamental. You certainly don't want to fail slow.
Thanks. Okay. Another question that came in before the session started, actually came into my inbox. What advice would you have for a business that is currently trading just within the UK, that is looking to expand internationally into Middle East and Asia? Who wants that one? James?
Get some really, really good third-party taxation advice. One of the things, it kind of a little bit what Colin was referring to. It's a lonely place has been number one, and by definition, there is no one above you that is a functional expert that you can bounce ideas off. You cannot possibly know everything, and the withholding tax of Japan or the Middle East, you know, it's an impossibility. So have a really trusted, ideally global professional service firm on hand that you can bounce ideas off and ensure you are set up to succeed from day one, the instant you start trading there, because otherwise it's going to unravel real quick down the line.
And anyone else, anything to add in there?
Yeah, I'll just add that. Earlier in my career, I was involved in launching the international franchise business for mums and papas, and the first territory we went into was the Middle East, and then we went into Asia. So whoever that was that asked the question, if they wanted to get in touch, I'd be happy to have a chat. So it's a little while ago since I did it, but you know, there's still some experience there. I'd be happy to have a telephone call, going back to the network point, to share my experiences.
Brilliant, thanks, Colin. Another question that's actually come in, but it's actually a client I went to see the other day that'll probably watch this recording. So, what advice would you have to a business that is 20 million, looking at growing to 50 million, and currently they've expanded, outgrown their current systems? Management accounts are 9 months behind the period end. Who wants that one? Mark?
Go on, man. Do you know what? Absolutely grow from 20 to 50 million. When I was talking about McKinsey's 7S earlier, kind of that detection of, you know, across your business, whether it's your systems, whether it's your processes, whether it's your people that are kind of behind the curve. Part of the FD's role is to make sure that across the piece, whether it's systems, whether it's resourcing, etc., you kind of grow in between 20 and 50. So you need plans for when you're 20 million, what's it look like when you're 30, 40 and 50? What resources do you need in place? What management reporting do you need in place? And fix it. So, you know, if they should, you know, their management accounts team, their FD, their FC, should reach out to the network. You know, is it the system that's wrong? Is it the inputs into it now? What is it as part of the fabric and the system that's not working? Is it the quality of data that's coming out? Does the quality of the data not marry up with the rest of the data in the business? You often see that in that as you grow up, you'll have data at the start of and you'll have KPIs, but as you grow, they don't kind of link. So it's forming that linkage. So, you know, they should reach out to the likes of yourself, bring experts in that can handhold, or, you know, advisors that can help them get through those growing pains up to 50 million. But they can absolutely do it. It's about kind of maintaining that balance, not just in finance, but throughout the organisation.
Thanks, Mark. And James?
Well, just to build it, one of the things I'm a big believer in is trying to second guess in advance when that moment in time is going to come, because it's a real skill, but you've got to unemotionally let go of what got you here, because it ain't going to get you there.
Yeah.
Because some of the growing pains we've talked about here, it's like a house of cards. The bigger you grow, if it's not the right foundation for the level you want to be at, it's going to become more and more stress tested, and failure is an inevitability if you don't fix these things ahead of time. So basically dress for the job you want, not the job you've got.
Yeah.
Mark, you had something to add?
No, just to bring in real world experience, to add to what James said. The energy systems catapults, that was a startup, but the systems that we put in place there should be fit for a 50 million pound business. We had that in mind when it set up. It didn't have to be costly, didn't have to be, but we imagined what we were going to be, and I think it's about 20 odd million now. It's certainly still fit for purpose now, but then, is it expandable? Does it give the business what it needs when it grows further?
Thanks for that. Colin?
Yeah, just to add a similar thing there, and that is that if you think about the scenario that's just been described there, and they're perhaps 9 months behind on their management accounts, I think what you can be fairly confident is that the team as they are today, whether they've got the capability or not, forget about that. But in terms of the time, if they had the time to do it, they would have done it by now. So it does suggest that they need some external help, not because they can't do it, but it's they've got the day-to-day job to do, and they've got to run that business day to day, and suddenly they've got to find some more time to fix something and potentially put in place some new systems, processes, whatever it might be. And I had a business earlier in my career where I was a group FD. It was a multi-business unit group, and I came across a problem. Going back to what mistakes have you made? I found a problem in one of the subsidiaries, and it was pretty clear to me that there was no resource within my business that I could deploy onto that problem to fix it. And so I brought in an interim person, an interim accountant, to just work on that as a dedicated project, and that person fixed it within 6 weeks for me. And had we have not done that, it probably would have run on for at least 12 months, because it would always have been the thing that got pushed behind today's priority.
Thanks, Colin. Another question popped in. How do you ensure that your finance team is ready to face the challenges that organic growth brings? You want that, Mark?
Yes. So, first of all, it's making sure that you've got you communicate the structure, and you describe to your team how that structure will evolve. But also, early on in the process, use some kind of imagineering exercise to say, okay, imagine we're 20 million pound now. One day we're going to be 50 million. What does that look like? What impact? And get the team to understand the impacts that's going to have on the business, so that in their head they can almost gear themselves up for, we'll need to fix the financial processes, or the ops system doesn't link into it now, so we need to fix that. We might need, that'll mean an extra X number of invoices, so we need to move from manual to online and cloud-based solutions. So if you bring your team with you and get them thinking about it as well, because like we said before, you've got a collective brain within that team. They all get it, but you're there to kind of frame it and set the picture, and then you can all come up with the right workable solutions.
Thanks, Mark. That pretty much brings us to the end and to the questions. So a massive thank you to you guys. If anyone does want to reach out to you to ask any questions, you're all on LinkedIn. Is that probably the easiest way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah. So if anyone does want to reach out, you'll find the guys on LinkedIn. If you can't find them, then you can route through myself, no problem. But yeah, big thank you to your insights there. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in and listened. And yeah, I'd like to formally bring the session to a close. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Cheers, guys.